Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining this fourth session of the um, RENEW18 Open Research Seminar. I'm Marco Stori. I'm a postdoc in the project, and today I have the pleasure of welcoming Delphine Bellis. Delphine is a professor of philosophy of science at the University of Montpellier Paul Valéry. Research focuses on the history of philosophy of science in the 17th century, especially Descartes and Gassendi, of whom we will talk today. She recently published a new edition of Descartes' Le Monde in 2023, and she co-edited with Tim Garber and Carla Rita Palmerino the book Pierre Gassendi, Humanism, Science, and the Birth of Modern Philosophy, also in 2023. Today, Delphine will discuss with us a draft paper entitled Does Nature Obey Laws? The Status of the Nomological Model in Gassendi's Philosophy. Delphine will have 10-15 minutes for a short presentation of her paper, then we'll open the discussion. So without further ado, I leave you the floor, and thank you again very much for joining us today and presenting your work and sharing your work with us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marco, and thank you to all of you for being here and also for reading this draft paper. Well, it's really a draft, as Marco said. It's far from being in its final state, and it's rather a sketch of what I hope will be later become a more polished paper. But it's also kind of summary of inquiries more than of positive results. And as you must have realized, some parts of the paper present avenues that I pursued, but which turned out to be dead ends. Well, I'm very honored to be here with all these Newton specialists and also one specialist of laws of nature, Stefan, who did a wonderful job on this topic, and especially a few years ago, who generously shared his bibliography on laws of nature on the Hopus mailing list, and from which I've benefited a lot. I'm going to share my screen. Also, I haven't put much on it. I must admit that I'm far from having read all the references that Stefan had compiled, but my rough impression is that Gassendi has never really been given an important place in that literature. Actually, he's hardly ever mentioned. Jen Ruby mentions that Charlton, so it's on the slide, who speaks once of motion, its causes, kinds, and universal laws. Leges draws on Descartes, which means not on Gassendi. And Sophie Roux, in Les lois de la nature à l'âge classique, la question terminologique, mentions Kepler's conception of mathematical laws referred to by Gassendi. And she also gives a quotation from Gassendi in which he wrote that God could violate the laws of nature, and that's a passage I analyze in my paper. And well, that's pretty much it. Admittedly, there are a few papers in the list I could not lay my hands on, and I could not check whether Gassendi was mentioned or not. But the global impression is that Gassendi is not really a figure mentioned in the recent or even older literature on the laws of nature in the early modern period. One reason why the topic of laws of nature in Gassendi has not been investigated might be that mathematics played a rather marginal and, in any case, complicated role in Gassendi's philosophy. As a consequence, one can hardly expect to find laws of nature in a mathematical form in his works. That is to say that what we usually retain as counting as scientific laws in physics. Moreover, this topic of laws of nature has so far largely eluded Gassendi scholars. Margaret Osler, in particular, gave some reasons why there was no room for the notion of laws of nature, understood as imposing some necessity on the natural world in Gassendi's philosophy. So I've put two quotes from her Divine Will and the Mechanical Philosophy. First quote, necessity found expression in the view that the laws of nature describe the essences of things and can be known a priori, while the empiricist and probabilist interpretations of scientific knowledge provided a way of thinking about the contingency of a world that no longer contained essences in the Platonic or Aristotelian sense. And obviously, Gassendi corresponds to the second part of the quotation in her view. And on the second quotation, no reified laws of nature exist in Gassendi's world. There may be groups of similar individuals that behave similarly because of their similar individual natures, but there do not exist additional laws or relations that determine the behavior of those individuals in any necessary way. Catherine Wilson is in the line of Osler when she writes in From Limits to Laws. Yet several well-known philosophers of the 17th century seem to have only a vague, if imposing, idea of a law of nature, with no direct links to the new successes of the mathematical sciences. Gassendi asserted that Epicurus was wrong to make chance a fashioner of the world, but he did not introduce laws of nature as a replacement for chance. Indeed, in a voluntary spirit, he insisted that God's absolute power is inconsistent with any kind of natural necessity. Osler related Gassendi's position regarding the laws of nature to his voluntarist theology, and she drew a parallel with Newton in that respect. That's on page 151 of Divine Will and the Mechanical Philosophy. And the idea was that if God instituted laws of nature, he could change them at will. Therefore, they had no necessity in this world. Well, hence the question I have, can there be provisional laws of nature from a Gassendist perspective, and what would that mean? Well, and I wonder also to what extent Gassendi could be seen as a forerunner of Newton and laws of nature. I also wonder a lot about the relationship to Boyle in that respect, but I must admit that I have no definitive answer to these questions. But what I'm interested in are basically two things in this draft paper on Gassendi. The first is what role can laws of nature play in a mostly empiricist natural philosophy in which God is considered mainly as a free agent, which can change the order of nature at will. And the second, is there any relationship between the way Gassendi conceived of scientific laws and the way he conceived of civil laws? The reason why I attempted to focus on these 2 points is that the concept of law in Gassendi's philosophy might contribute to diversifying the conceptual landscape surrounding this notion in the first half of the 17th century. My impression is that Gassendi in that respect does not quite fit in the big picture elaborated on the basis of the usual suspects such as Descartes or Leibniz. Therefore, my idea is to use Gassendi in order to revise the interpretative dichotomy established in particular by Garber in his God, Laws, and the Order of Nature, namely the dichotomy, either God plays an important role as legislator in natural philosophy, leading to the development of a natural philosophy in which the laws of nature are central, or God plays no role, or at least not as a transcendent lawgiver, and there is no place for a natural philosophy based on the laws of nature. So I'm going to skip the first part of my paper, so in which I showed that the principle of inertia was not identified as a law of nature by Gassendi, and I directly move to the second part of my paper. Given the fact that Gassendi's approach to natural philosophy was always intertwined with his approach to the history of philosophy, as Lynn Schmidt-Joyd has shown, I had to evaluate whether Epicureanism could represent an obstacle to the adoption of laws of nature because of the role of chance in that philosophy, as suggested by Catherine Wilson in the quotation which was on the previous slide, or whether Epicureanism could provide Gassendi with some conceptual resources to elaborate a specific conception of the laws of nature, not dependent on a divine legislature. And the latter had been suggested by Alistair Crombie. So I've put this quotation on the slide. The alternative atomist conception of laws of nature arising entirely out of the necessity in the nature of matter alone, without any divine lawgiver or providential design, was set out by Lucretius, following essentially Epicurus. And as suggested by Crombie, this specific conceptual resource lay in the notion of foedera naturae, pacts or covenants of nature, which is often translated by laws of nature. So this is what I explore in the second part of the paper. The problem, in my view, with the pacts of nature is that this Lucretian notion might have been made a bit more central than it really was for Lucretius. I've identified only 5 occurrences in De Rerum Natura. Moreover, the translation by laws of nature is somewhat misleading, suggesting that Lucretius meant something similar to what the early modern natural philosophers understood by laws of nature. Its use was indeed mostly related to the general and stable characteristics of each living species. Pacts of nature in Lucretius were not so much principles of conservation, like Descartes' laws of nature, as rules for the formation of composite bodies that prevented both their dissolution and the permanent appearance of irregular, monstrous, chaotic forms. Gassendi, when he commented on this Lucretian notion, was aware that pacts of nature in Lucretius' text could also account for the dissolution of bodies and for the properties of the magnets. But as I've tried to show, it didn't do anything with that. I cannot say whether this was this manifold role played by that notion in Lucretius, which is what prevented him from attempting to integrate it into his own natural philosophy, qua laws of nature. But it strikes me that this is not something that looked promising to him. In the third part of the paper, so I present the results of my search for the occurrences of the term law in Gassendi's natural philosophy. In a number of texts, it's used to designate a constant, sometimes quantitative relationship between 2 phenomena. And then I focus on 2 passages in the Syntagma Philosophicum where Gassendi explicitly mentioned what he called laws of nature. This is part of one quotation, but I'm not going to read it. But in the paper, I show that for Gassendi, there are 2 regimes, that of the laws of nature, from which a natural philosopher can draw rational conclusions about bodies, and that of divine power, which is not bound by these laws. Therefore, these laws of nature, or a law of nature in Gassendi's philosophy, therefore there are laws of nature or a law of nature in Gassendi's philosophy, but their dependence on God, who established them, does not guarantee their necessity, quite the contrary. God established the laws of nature as he wished, without, however, imposing them on his power. God is not bound by the laws of nature. It therefore seems that God could change them at will. So with Gassendi, we are faced with a conception of the laws of nature that depend on God, but not in the sense that they derive from his essence as an immutable being, as in Descartes, but their dependence on divine will and omnipotence rather than on his immutability or his wisdom, combined with a considerable gap between human understanding and this divine power that eludes it, leads to a form of contingency in the laws of nature. Understandably, these laws cannot be deduced a priori from rational metaphysical considerations about divine nature or will. So laws of nature depend on a divine legislator, but knowledge of the laws does not rely on our knowledge of God or on metaphysics. hence the importance of an empirical approach to the laws of nature, conceived as phenomenal regularities. It is the empirical approach that allows us to verify that these are indeed the laws that God has established in nature. And so in the last part of the paper, I try to shed light on this conception of laws of nature by relying on the parallel with Gassendi's conception of civil laws. In doing that, I suggest two things. First, there might be a relationship between laws of nature and natural laws or civil laws in the early modern period. And two, this is where Epicureanism might offer more valuable resources to elaborate a notion of law that is less dependent on our knowledge of a divine legislator and that can take on a more empirical, immanent dimension. So I analyze a text from the Syntagma Philosophicum in which Gassendi interpreted the passage from Book 9 of Diogenes Laertius on Democritus. Far from considering that Democritus was suggesting the arbitrariness of sensible qualities, Gassendi insisted on the contrary on the dimension of nomological determination that atomist physics allowed us to introduce. The parallel with positive laws from which values derive marks the non-arbitrary dimension of natural causal order. In this passage, legality in the natural order did not refer to a transcendent God who established laws, but to a regulated relationship between the atomic constitution of bodies and phenomenal qualities. Gassendi did not take advantage of the parallel with positive laws to establish a parallel between the human legislator and the divine legislator, but from an epistemological point of view, the legality of nature referred to a form of material immanence. So Gassendi's interpretation can undoubtedly be explained by his own conception of natural laws and civil laws in the political and social order. These are neither the expression of transcendent moral values nor the result of human arbitrariness, but the civil translation of a natural right and the result of an agreement between human beings in their interests about what is useful for them. So that's it.
Thank you very much, Delphine, for this presentation. Can you unshare your...
Yeah, I was about to do it.
So I guess we can start our discussion, our Q&A. I mean, I have a few questions, at least one to start with, perhaps, before to break the ice. Or Arnaud, please go ahead. I will, go later.
Yeah, because I've got a lay question, so you've got the elaborate one after. Thank you very much. I was really interested, and I didn't know anything about this notion of federa naturae from Lucretius. That was really really interesting to read about. I'm not so sure that the parallel can be made so far, but my question is about exactly what you said on the last point about the contingency of the laws of nature. So it's kind of quite clear that you can say that laws are contingent because they depend on God's will and not on his essence. And so, but my question is really a question of understanding, is there a room for a change within the laws of nature? Or whether it's only something like a decree with one single decision that will establish those laws, though contingently, let's say forever. So that's it, this other notion of contingency or of change of laws of nature that I would be interested in knowing is whether it's what you meant by how do you call this immanent empiric dimension in Gassendi. So yeah, exactly.
Okay. I think there are several questions in what you...
Well, no contingency. So is this only a single act of divine will, or is this more? We can put it this way.
Yeah. The thing is that when I talk of contingency, actually, you've noticed that I try to distance from author a way, maybe I've remained too close to her. And it's true that it's a consequence she draws from her analysis of Gassendi. But to be perfectly honest, there is no real textual support. I mean, I've never found in Gassendi's texts that he explicitly says that, you know, laws of nature are contingent. So that's more a consequence that Osler draws when, of course, Gassendi says that God could change laws of nature if he wants to, if it pleases him. Okay. So that's contingency only understood on that basis, I would say. So maybe I shouldn't stick too much to this model determination of the laws of nature. First, because there's no explicit textual support for it. And I'm more interested actually in what this means from an epistemological point of view than from a metaphysical point of view related to the modal status of the laws of nature, actually. Yeah, the thing, yeah. The problem, and that's the difference maybe with other philosophers also drawing on the will of God, is the introduction by Gassendi of this notion that, okay, if God wills, he can change them. So he's not bound to make one single decree. His will is not bound to any decree he once made. So does that
Yes, yeah. So I think that's perhaps so you've got this quote where he speaks about is exactly the God's will, and he can always, he's not bound to this. That's what exactly you said. And I just wanted to know whether he says more. And as I understand you, there is not so much more to say. It's and then perhaps it's not so. Perhaps yeah, you cannot draw that too much from this. Just he has a general picture of what we still could call contingency in this sense, but I understand that's not so elaborated, so that he could say not only God is not bound to, but he could also change things. Well, it's not excluded, but it's not explicitly said, so we just stick to this general picture. Okay, that's what okay. But my question, and then I just leave the floor, is about exactly, you've got this big quote, this passage, and my question is, how much present is this kind of reflections in Gassendi? So you say it doesn't say so much, but where does it talks about God's will, so to speak?
Yeah, well, he talks about God's will when he writes about providence in particular. So the book on the efficient principle. But the problem with Gassendi is you cannot make a systematic word search. I mean, you can to a certain extent, but it's not entirely reliable. So that's what I did, but I cannot guarantee that I found all the occurrences of laws. I tried. So I tried lex, leg, blah, blah, blah. But I cannot say for sure, but I suspect that in the book on the efficient principle and where it's about providence and things like that, there's nothing about laws.
Okay.
So, okay, I have to admit that the topic is not that present in Gassendi. It is present. I mean, it uses the term law to refer to a certain number of things in natural philosophy. So it's not just, you know, one text about laws and the will of God. No, but it's true that yeah, I couldn't find a lot of texts about that. I'm not saying that I found them all, but
thank you.
Thank you very much. And so Stefan is next on the list, please.
Yes. Thank you, Delphine, for this draft from which I really learned a lot. I think the textual analysis that you make were very interesting and quite compelling as well. And I think you have shown that Gassendi deserves a place in the literature on laws of nature. So thanks for raising awareness. Now I have a question related to your main thesis, which you spell out at the beginning of the paper, and perhaps in the final version of the paper you will drop this. I don't know, depending on where you go. That's always that's how things go. But your main thesis I thought was really interesting, namely that it is possible to appeal to laws of motion without the idea of a divine legislator. But I have a question regarding this, and I also refer to the same quotation that has already been flagged by Arnaud, namely the longer quotation on page 11, taken from the Syntagmata Philosophicum. And are all microphones muted because I hear some echoes?
Mine is not, but
Okay, but it's okay. I'll continue. The quotation where it is stated that God Himself created the laws of motion at His will, and indeed, I agree that this entails a voluntarist position that rejects competing positions, namely more intellectualist positions, a la Descartes, a la Leibniz, and so on and so forth. But I do not see how this dismisses with the idea of a divine legislator. You still have someone or an entity external, different, transcendental to nature that imposes these laws. So that is my question. How do you harmonize this voluntarist position and the claim that it is possible to appeal to laws of motion without having an transcendent legislator?
Thank you very much, Stefan, because when I prepared the talk and I reread the paper, I realized that this was not clear. So your question offers me the possibility to refine the expression of my thesis. Sorry.
Okay.
Too much sun in the place I live, even in February.
I have the same problem.
Yes, you do. So what I meant, yeah, of course, it's what Osler called voluntarist theology. So I cannot claim that the conception of the laws of nature in Gassendi has no relation whatsoever with a divine legislator. My claim, but I realized that I didn't formulate it in a clear way, was that this divine legislator, in my view, does not play a real role in natural philosophy, in the sense that, contrary to Descartes, where he draws the laws of nature, the laws of motion, from his understanding of God as being an immutable being, for Gassendi, you cannot really know God in the way Descartes claims you can know him. So, of course, there is a divine legislator, but once you've said that, that's pretty much it. So all I meant, but I should reformulate it, so I'm aware of it, is that you cannot rely on the position of a divine legislator from Gassendi's point of view to draw any conclusion regarding, let's say, the content of the laws of nature in natural philosophy. Are things a bit clearer like that?
It's more clear, and I think that thesis is really interesting and provocative and an important one to make. So that's, yeah, I would be very curious to see how you develop that. That seems very interesting. Okay, and then one thing that's my second point, and then I will stop, is that you kind of motivate the paper by, indeed, as you did also in your in your presentation by revising a dichotomy. And I don't know, you might keep it in, and if you keep it in, I think it's worth looking at an old paper by an historian, Francis Oakley, from 1961 in the journal Church History, and he also sets up a related dichotomy that might be interesting because he distinguishes between regularities resulting from immanent structures in nature and externally imposed laws by divine authors. So that might be interesting.
Yeah.
So in the end, you might keep in this dichotomy, but I think you don't need it. I think Gassendi is really interesting in his own right. As you mentioned, there's barely no literature on his take on laws of nature. It's clear that he was a voluntarist. And what you just said about his take on laws of motion, I think that's quite compatible with Newton's view. So I think he's definitely relevant, and you don't need that dichotomy in order to motivate the paper. But that's something that I wanted to say. Perhaps that might be useful when you rewrite it and
Yeah. No, of course, Oakley was in your bibliography. But I haven't read it. I've only checked whether Gassendi was mentioned in the paper, which is not the case. But I should certainly now take the time to read it and see whether what he says, based on this dichotomy, can also help me think about the place of Gassendi in this history. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So we have a question from Casper de Witt, who is a PhD student in our group.
Yes. Hi. Thank you very much for the paper. I really liked it. There's a few things I wanted to say and ask, but I'll just start with one question and then we can go around the room. I wanted to ask a question about the Foederate Naturae. This somewhat reminds me of the plastic natures of the Cambridge Platonists, and it also reminds me of the philosopher that I'm working on, Nicolaas Hartzoeker, who seems to have similar ideas to what you describe Gassendi has here about some kind of formative principle or formative force to explain mostly biological phenomena. And I'm still trying to understand this. It also seems to be somewhat similar to the Aristotelian forms, although I must admit I don't grasp the theory of Aristotle yet. But my question is, do you have any ideas on what if there could be like a connection between the Aristotelian forms and Gassendi's use of the Foederate Naturae?
Okay. Do you mind before answering, I try to do something about the sun. Well, Gassendi was really a staunch anti-Aristotelian. So even if from time to time he keeps some concepts coming rather from scholastic Aristotelians and transforms them. Well, I think what Gassendi does with the Foederate Naturae goes more into the direction of what he calls semina rerum, seeds of things. So I think it's something different, but I think that's really the line. Foederate Naturae, semina rerum, and this applies well, mostly to living beings, not only, because you have semina rerum also in mineralogy to explain the structure of crystals. And this really plays the role of a formative and organizing principle, but Gassendi insists on the fact that it's material. It's purely material. It's like a very subtle fire. So that's what would prevent me from making a parallel with Aristotle's forms in that respect. That's what I would say.
Yeah, it's interesting with the, I think Hartzucker has taken a lot from Gassendi in this regard, because he also tries to place this as like a subtle fire. He uses the same terminology, but also this is a material thing. It takes up a certain place, and in this field of very subtle substance, that is where the atoms float in, basically. And but he needs some kind of, like, there is some kind of intelligence in it, so it makes certain specific forms. So I thought this was very interesting. I definitely need to read Gassendi on this. Yeah, it was very interesting. Yeah.
It sounds indeed very Gassendi, because Gassendi also talks about, within this seeds of things, of a kind of knowledge that allows for organization, but all of this is purely material. So even when he talks about a soul, a animal soul, it's purely material. But I would be delighted to learn that Hartzucker read Gassendi and did something out of Gassendi that would make me very, very happy. Because I'm really interested in this Mattia, don't laugh. That's what I'm interested in. I really think that the reception and diffusion of Gassendi is something that should be studied, and that has been a bit, hidden. And I think there's some research to be done on this reception, which has basically disappeared at some point. So I'm glad to learn that, yes, some people did read Gassendi. I was convinced about it, but I want some clues now. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And then Ovidio has a question, please.
Yeah, thank you so much, Delphine. Thank you for the paper. It was super informative for me. I think I'm persuaded that Gassendi's ideas on laws of nature are very voluntarist, as it were. One thing I'm wondering is, so this is definitely a picture which is in contrast with Descartes' views on laws of nature, right? Because, like, for Descartes, the laws of nature flow directly from God's immutability and so on. But I wonder if it's worth making a comparison between Gassendi's views on laws and Descartes' views on eternal truths, right? On the truths of mathematics, because Descartes also had this point that, God is free to choose the eternal truth, and he would be free to change them according to his will, right? But in Descartes' case, that I'm not sure if that would make the laws, the eternal truths, the laws of the truths of mathematics, to be kind of what's the word here?
Contingent?
Yes, contingent, exactly. So I wonder, in what sense do laws of nature for Gassendi are actually contingent? Because even if God is free to change them, that they still are necessary for us, right? So I wonder if the parallel between Gassendi's laws of nature and Descartes' eternal truths can be, I don't know, interesting in elucidating this.
Thank you very much, Ovidio. The difference I see between Descartes on mathematical truths and what Gassendi says about God being able to change the laws of nature is that if I read correctly Descartes' letters to Mersenne, God could have chosen other mathematical truths, but once he has chosen them, since he's immutable, he's not going to change them. So that's a kind of counterfactual, so to say, in Descartes. Whereas Gassendi writes that God still could change the laws of nature. So that's a difference I see. Yeah. But thank you very much for the parallel, because that's also very enlightening to see how the will of God can play different roles in the conception of truth and science in the early modern period. Thank you. Yeah.
So next on the list is Henny, but I guess Mattia has a follow-up. So if it is a follow-up, please go ahead, Mattia.
Yes, has raised 3 hands.
No, I'm only the third one. No, Delphine, no. Yeah, it's partly a follow-up as a different question.
That you've raised 3 hands.
No. I think what you were discussing with Ovidio had a little bit the same point in mind, which is indeed that for Descartes, I think the point is not necessary that these are the laws of nature, but once they are there, they are true everywhere. So if you want the level there, it's the second order of modality, whereas I think, as you describe it, which seems to be quite right, for Gassendi it's a different level. There it's really at this stage already, if you want in this world, it's not, let's not speak about possible words and so forth, it messes up, but I think it's that sort of thing. And I think it's even clearer in the replies to the objectors. In the second objections there, Descartes is even more clear about the modality thing. But my question was about a different part of your paper, Delphine, which is the one on the perception bit, as you can imagine. So it's page 13, and I think it's quite important there that we are describing how Gassendi renders normal as by laws rather than by convention. And there you also have the important words like institution, constitution, and so forth. And my wonder here is whether Gassendi might be reacting to Descartes' theory of an institution of nature. So that would be important, because I think there is an important asymmetry in Descartes, that you have the laws of body-body ruling the relation of body to body, so inertia and so forth, but there's no describing perception based on a psychophysiological laws. There, Descartes is speaking about an institution of nature. So the mind is made in such a way that, given that we have a certain brain stimulus, we perceive red, green, and so forth. So there you will have something quite interesting in Gassendi, that he is having a law where Descartes is not having one. It's a different sort of a thing, but you will have an important asymmetry, I think, between the body-body and body-mind causation, or realm and whatever. And I think it's quite important is the generation after Descartes then is speaking about laws in matters of perception. It's significant that the only evidence that you have there is the conversation with Burman, which is not an authorial text, and so forth. So as far as I see, it's something like Descartes' first readers, maybe even anti-Cartesians like Gassendi, who are reacting to it and introducing another law in a different matter. So my point will be here for you, it's a research question, is of course, but also to keep quite distinct the different sort of laws that you might have there, and maybe Gassendi is something doing important even before other people in matters of perception. And that will complicate his role and make it even more interesting, I think, maybe. You're the expert here.
Thank you very much, Mattia. I should certainly have paid more attention to that, because I devoted some time also to Gassendi's texts on sensation. Let me see. You might be right. Thank you very much for the suggestion in any case, because it's true that as far as sensation is concerned, yeah, the Cartesian institution of nature is something horrible for Gassendi. No, I mean, that's what I've tried to show in other papers, which you know, Mattia. For an empiricist like Gassendi, you need a different model that will account for some kind of reliability of the senses and some kind of guarantee for a realist theory of perception. So yeah, then that the law could play a role in that. I hadn't been thinking about that, but I like very much this suggestion of yours. I was more focused on the way he twisted, Diogenes Laertius, and but yes, thank you very much. I'll try to think about it. It's very, very suggestive. Thank you, Mattia.
I may just one more thing. You have something important there, because the card for the institution of nature, his argument is that God made the human mind the way it is in order for us to better survive.
Mm-hmm.
So there you have something like a providence. It's one of the few bits in the card theory when you have indeed providence come into the fore and be driving the entire enterprise. Whereas it will be very nice to see the position that someone like Gassendi there is giving, well, here there is a necessary connection between the two. Which, by the way, I think it's also taken up by other thinkers. I think some of the arguments by Leibniz against law are going in that direction. So you might maybe find something important there, and even better describe the opposition between the two.
Yeah, thank you very much. I must say that I haven't found in Gassendi the equivalent of what you can find in the Sixth Meditation about, this providential organization of sensation. So, but I have to look it up first, and second, I mean, it's perfectly coherent what you've suggested with other text by Gassendi. Some years ago, we had a discussion together, and you asked me, but with some kind of, you were really shocked. You asked me, Delphine, is it right that Gassendi claims that there are cold and hot atoms? But of course, yeah, he put it like that. But it doesn't mean that you're going to touch with your fingers the atoms and they're cold or hot. But I think it reflects this, this idea he has that there must be some necessary connection indeed between the atomic structure, let's say, and the effect it produces on our sensory organs. So, thank you.
So, Henny, you're next on the list. And sorry for delaying your intervention, but now the floor is yours.
Marco. Thanks a lot, Delphine, for your text. So I've read it. I've learned some things. It has been mentioned by Casper already. I was a bit struggling with this notion of seeds, and perhaps less with the seeds, but with the vis seminalis, because these forces, they have to account for regularities, but without a kind of transcendent law or something divine. And but still they seem to be organizing principles, and in your description they seem to be active, even knowledge like or quasi-spiritual. And lately I've been studying a bit Leibniz, and it brought to mind some of it seems a parallel to something like a Leibnizian internal principle of order. And so I was surprised that Gassendi's atomism with these vis seminalis seems to blur a certain line between mechanistic atomism and kind of metaphysics of form, what Casper mentioned, or perhaps metaphysics of force. And you told Casper, but these seeds are material. But what about the vis seminalis? How do you bring it in this model of atomism?
Thank you very much, Henny. It's very much debated within the very, very small circle of Gassendi scholars, whether Gassendi should be seen as a mechanist or not, or more as a kind of proto-vitalist, to use a vocabulary that my friend Charles loves a lot. So basically, and I mean, digging in that direction of proto-vitalism, you have, for example, Hiro Hirai with his book on the semence, and Gassendi plays a big role in that book, and you have, so in the other comes the focused on the fact that Gassendi is an anatomist, and so putting him in the camp of the mechanical philosophy. So, and I think if there is this kind of interpretative debate, this means that it's difficult, and your puzzle is perfectly justified in a sense. My idea, I mean, I don't want to I'm not going to say he's more a mechanist or is more a proto-vitalist, but what I'm really convinced about is, on that topic, is a materialist. I mean, it is clearly not Leibnizian. What organizes matter is matter itself. It's just that you have several levels, and to reply to Casper, because I think that's the difference with what he describes in Hartzucker. You have the atoms, then you have some assemblies of atoms forming the seminareum, the seed, so that's the second level of, and then you have bodies. And this intermediate level of semina is very important in order to account for the organization of living beings, of crystals, as I mentioned. And of course, the problem is that how do you account for the relation between the first and the second level? It gives you the impression that just because of specific gathering in a certain order of some atoms, this, I was about to say create, no, this makes some new properties appear. I'm aware that this sounds very emergentist, and maybe I'm going too far when I phrase it like that. But what I would try to avoid would be to import either in his atoms or in his semina something which is not material. And also because, you know, he has this debate with Descartes in the Fifth Objections and the Disquisitio Metaphysica, where he puts forward the hypothesis that matter could think. It's the way he phrases it is a bit different from Locke, and you have the impression that well, matter could be endowed with thinking. You don't know how this could happen, but well, there's nothing contradictory in his view. More than blurring the line, I would say there is a kind of refined, complex materialism at play there. Maybe that's a nice way to say it, that covers a little bit the difficulties involved. I'm aware of it. Because usually when you find a difficulty in Gassendi, you look for a text which would help you solve the difficulty, and you cannot find it. That's really the problem with him. So I'm not sure my answer is fully satisfactory, but at least I hope it's faithful to this materialist dimension I see in many aspects of Gassendi's philosophy.
Thank you.
There are no. Oh, Casper has another question. Then I will ask a question myself.
And I also have questions for you, actually.
Yes, I was just one because nobody had a question. I was now, because of reading this text, I was thinking about laws, about the concept of laws, and how there is actually, this is a question a bit for everybody. So that there is in the transition from the legal sphere to the scientific sphere using laws, I think a law becomes something very different, because in natural philosophy, it seems to refer to necessary regularities. For instance, in physics, a body cannot react to imparted motion in any different way than that it does. But in the human or legal sphere, laws are not necessarily followed at all. They are prescriptive, but to a reality that does not conform to it. So at least not completely. Because if the social reality would conform completely, then there would be no need for a law. So I just thought this was a interesting things, that laws are taken to signify this steady, necessary kind of rules, which cannot be circumvented. But actually, where it comes from, the metaphor, laws are all the time circumvented perfectly. But I just thought this was an interesting thing to think about laws.
Yeah, thank you very much, Casper. Yeah, usually, well, some commentators say, yeah, the laws in natural philosophy in the early modern period become something different, and I'm not saying all of them, but I think it's interesting to try to reflect on whether there can be a relation or not between the two spheres. And what I've tried to show in the paper is that I think there is one in Gassendi, at least. But the interesting thing is that positive civil laws for him are rooted in nature. So there is this kind, so it comes from natural rights, and natural right for him is basically based on what is useful for you. So laws, yeah, comes from this. So since Gassendi tries to root civil laws in this natural laws, and those naturals are themselves rooted in in nature, in human nature. I think this is what prevents him from having a notion of law as something, arbitrary, that, as you said, almost never applies, and things like that. But that would certainly be interesting to have a kind of broader picture in order to compare with other philosophers who defend another conception of positive or civil laws, I think, in the early modern period. And the problem is that, I mean, I'm talking for myself first, but I think most of us are more or less in the same situation. We are specialists in early modern natural philosophy, and very few among us are knowledgeable. I mean, me in particular, about political philosophy. So that's that's my problem, I must say. But yeah, I should learn.
So if I may, just because it was a kind of open question from Casper, if you haven't read it, I would advise you to read Sophie Rowe's lengthy article, which is basically a lexicographic study of how the expression law of nature was used then in natural science. And in direct answer to your question, it doesn't come from civil law. It doesn't come from, right, it comes from theology. So the expression was basically used in theology and then applied to a natural science. So it's another route as she proves it. So in any case, it's worth having a look at this study.
I mean, my comment/question is also kind of a follow-up, and I think I should also reread Sophie's paper in that regard, just because while I was reading your very interesting and informative paper, Delphine, one thing I thought about and couldn't really answer was to which extent the term and therefore the concept of flow, loi, lex was stabilized or standardized in the period, with particular reference to, for instance, inertia, which is cite and mentioned that Gassendi never refers to inertia as a law, and also the case of Kepler's laws of planetary motion, saying that Gassendi does not refer to these laws as laws. And it occurred to my mind that, for instance, with my sources, 18th century astronomers, Jacques Cassini, for instance, when he talks about Kepler's laws, for instance, he calls them règles de Kepler. So the term is not, I mean, it is present in astronomical debates of the 18th century, of course, but it's not uniform. There is no consistent use of such a term. And I think that with inertia, although I know Newtonians might call it a law, some other natural philosopher might call it a principle, or I mean, phrase it in another way. So I was wondering whether this constellation of terms which were used throughout the early modern period was in a certain way, I mean, standardized, and what I mentioned are just residual example or cases, or whether it was more, it was less consistent in a way.
Yeah. Yeah, règle de Kepler is, yeah, I think I should have a look at, yeah, other terms also, not only lex in Gassendi, to see whether there is this kind of proliferation now. But for sure, I mean, it's a kind of retrospective approach to call everything a law, which early modern natural philosopher did not do in that systematic way. Yeah. But the interesting thing, however, is, I mean, in Gassendi, is that it does use laws in some cases. So, and to refer to different kinds of things. But not really what we would expect from a retrospective point of view. Yeah, but yeah, I'm interested in what comes after, especially, and that would be interesting to try to trace, yeah, how what we call laws were called, especially in the second half of the 17th century and even later. Yeah.
But it is also possible that there is a certain stabilization of the meta discourse on laws, whereas the uses and the practices are less strict. I don't know, but I guess Mathieu also had a follow-up possibly on.
Yeah, is that you have the very same ambiguity in Descartes already, and it's not depending on the French Latin variation. So you find regle, regula, loi, lex meanings, and it doesn't seem, as far as I can see, doesn't seem like Descartes has a different, deep conception of the grounding of the laws in gods and so forth. He seems to be using the two terms almost interchangeably.
That's
so
true.
I think
that's clear. In the Principia, that's very clear. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's why I think you should start really you should check both loi, lex, and so forth in already in Gassendi and so forth, which is, and Gassendi, yeah, Delphine, sorry for sorry for the time. And I was wondering if you are tracking this transition from the Federa Naturae to the laws of nature and so forth. What about checking the Italian translation of Lucretius? You have the one by Marchetti, which is 6468, and there is also adding reference to contemporary thinkers, so it's praising a lot Borelli, whom I think might also be a keen reader of Gassendi. You have, by the way, a thematic issue by On Physis, which is entirely devoted to Borelli. And I think there you have a lot of important connections with the Italians, especially in the south of the peninsula. So there Gassendi was read in Napoli well before Gassendi and also in the academies. So I will go in that direction, but try to see maybe they also systematize this sort of talk and they introduce laws of nature in a Gassendist sort of way. I don't know here. I really don't.
No, thank you for the suggestion. I mean, yeah, all the Naples area of reception is something I'd like to investigate. But for lack of time, and of course it's easier to try to focus on England because of Charlton and Boyle, and philosophical environment of Naples. I know it's important, but I don't really know how to orient in it. But that's certainly something that should be checked. Yes, I agree. Yeah.
Is there any? Henry, please.
Yeah, perhaps a broader question. Do you have the impression that Gassendi really has what you could call a robust metaphysical account of laws of nature? Because I think I'm not sure it was because I didn't grasp Arnaud's question in the beginning, but it was about the contingency, and so it's contingent about it depends on God's decision. So God could have established other laws of nature in Gassendi. So that's one point, and then the point that was raised by Casper. So this analogy between laws in a social context and laws of nature, it seems to perhaps rather to weaken also like a metaphysical foundation of laws in a robust sense for laws of nature, because I mean these are conventions also in a way. So I know it's not a very precise question, but
well, in general, you're not going to find in Gassendi the kind of robust metaphysical conceptions you can find in Descartes or Leibniz, for example. That's very clear. Also because from time to time, I mean, his writings can be very contextual too. That's less the case about the Syntagma Philosophicum, but still, his philosophy is not based on essences nor on innate ideas, or so. Of course, in a sense, his philosophy lacks in robustness precisely because it's very empiricist. I mean, not only in natural philosophy, but also as far as the formation of ideas and concepts is concerned. Yeah, it's a style of philosophizing that might appear a bit disappointing in terms of robustness or systematicity, or I'm perfectly aware of this, and it often happens that we can raise questions when reading Gassendi, and these questions are perfectly interesting from a metaphysical point of view, and you cannot find any satisfactory answer in his text. So I'm fine with that. Okay, no, Gassendi's conception is not metaphysically robust, but it's in a sense it's more a pragmatic, if I may say so, approach also to concepts. Concepts are important insofar as you do something with them, and knowledge of nature in that respect is Gassendi, yeah, is not interested in building a metaphysical system. I mean, his syntagma is composed of logic, physics, and ethics.
Yes, but I understand this, but perhaps my question was more, what does it mean for the concept of a law of nature? Is it not something totally different than what in another tradition is understood by that? Because is it not, couldn't we say then that in Gassendi it's a merely metaphorical use of the strict concept, so to say, of a law of nature?
Well, actually, it's also in a sense metaphorical in the 17th century.
Yeah.
Because you use the term law, lex, to express what God does in the world. But yes, of course, there's this theological background, but in a way, the way you reflect about those laws is related to civil laws. I mean, so, but yeah, maybe we're not going to find a very strong conception of laws of nature in Gassendi, but in a sense, it's not really a problem. What I'm interested in is how some philosophers in the 17th century use this notion of law, and they don't do it in the same way. And I'm perfectly fine with that. And I'm not trying to find in Gassendi another conception of a preconceived conception of law coming from Descartes or Leibniz or whatever. I'm more interested, I must admit, in finding something that would look like a bit like Newton because of the empirical dimension. But I think that's also part of the interest, if any, of this paper is this idea of diversifying our picture of laws of nature in the early modern period, and not reducing it to what would be formulated even in the 20th or 21st century qua laws of nature.
I perfectly understand that, yeah. But even when you compare with Newton, I think that Newton has an account of the necessity of these laws, and I feel that, of course, I don't know enough about Gassendi, but I see that Stefan is not agreeing with. But I mean the necessity seems not a strong necessity, and but perhaps that's not a problem for Gassendi.
Yeah, I think that's not a problem for Gassendi, indeed. And yeah, maybe this insistence on laws of nature as imposing necessity on the natural order is something, yeah, that was very much reflected upon in 20th century philosophy of science, but is that so central in natural philosophy in the 17th century? I don't know. But maybe Stefan would like to react. And I'd like to learn more also about Newton and what could be common or different with Newton.
It's okay. Well, I'm actually going to leave Newton aside for the moment, but I think I want to raise a more general issue, namely that the issue of there not being an explicit, clearly defined notion of a law of nature. That's not a problem unique to Gassendi. That's typical of a lot of authors. It's typical for the period. People started to do things differently. Teleological explanations were rejected, substantial forms were rejected, people started to use mathematics and experiments. So a lot of natural philosophy changed in a number of ways, and people started using new concepts, and they started using them before they had a clear notion of what it entailed. And I think laws of nature is a case in point, and I think it's very important if you're a historically oriented researcher to give due place to all the ambiguities and the attempts and the reformulations and so on and so forth, because I think the notion of a law of nature was not something that was clear from the beginning. It was something that was ambiguous, that was defined, characterized in different ways. And I think if we are interested in the historical origins of that concept, we should really look at the nitty-gritty details of how it was formulated and so on and so forth. So that was my general point that I wanted to make.
Thank you. Yeah, I fully agree.
Thank you very much. I think Ovidio also has a question. I don't know whether related or not.
Yeah, no, it's really to react to his question earlier, because I think, I mean, it doesn't matter how strong the metaphysical account of a law of nature is, right? So the background is, and I think this is important, the fact that nature does obey some sort of rules or laws is like a way of rejecting the Epicurean idea that, you know, everything happens by chance. So the classical picture of this type of atomism, right, where atoms just, you know, follow no rules, they just are in continuous motion, which is not governed by any kind of imposed law. I take it that Gassendi was reacting in the background against this meta view, as it were, right? And I think this is important to just to spell out.
Yes, certainly. Yeah, he's very explicit about his rejection of the notion of chance as it was used by the Epicureans. Even if, I mean, I might be mistaken because I don't know all the texts by Gassendi. I don't have the impression that he makes anywhere an explicit link between his rejection of chance and his use of laws of nature. But when he uses it, it's clear that what he has in mind is a form of regularity in nature and not a chaos that would arise from atoms colliding in every sense and so forth. Yeah.
Thank you. Is there any other question or comment? And of course, Delphine, if you wanted to raise any points, you're more than welcome to do so.
Yeah. Well, as I mentioned, I would be interested, but maybe that would be yet another paper in tracing, I guess, on this possible influence, especially in Charlton, in Boyle, in this Anglophone area. I was a bit when I read what Jane Rubis wrote about Charlton, that he mentions Lowe's just because of is inspired by Descartes and not by Gassendi. I'm really wondering whether one can find more in the Anglophone area, if you're aware of it, some possible traces of this conception of laws of nature, that so is more empirical, immanent, as one can find in Gassendi. I have the impression that in Boyle, I mean, at least for me, it's not very clear what's Boyle's conception of laws of nature can find. I've read different things, even texts by Boyle saying very different things, so I'm a bit puzzled. I know there is a paper by Friedrich Steinle in which, in part, he says a few things about Charlton. I have to have a closer look at that. But yeah, if you have any suggestions in that direction, in particular, I would be very interested, because, of course, what interests me in Gassendi, I mean, many things, but especially this idea that his empiricist approach to philosophy and to natural philosophy can have, in a way, been inspiring for English later empiricism. So I'm interested in, tracing all possible avenues going in that sense. If you have any idea. Casper, you?
I mean, Casper might.
Wait. Yes, I was thinking about placing a lawful nature against the chance nature of the Epicureans, but I think in Epicurean philosophy, there's matter still moves in a certain way. We can see that there is no total chaos, there is some kind of order, and that maybe the point is more that this order arises from the motions and the matter itself, not through a designer, and that this might be the problem or the difference. But then I also was thinking on about the physics of Gassendi here. On page 4, you wrote that the source of motion is, according to Gassendi, then in the atoms itself. So it is a force that makes a constant effort to free itself. Now, what I think, what I immediately thought of, this is kind of a reverse gravitation. Instead of that matter is attracted to each other, it is by repulsion that things move, because things make a constant effort to free themselves. So doesn't this also kind of imply that there is matter which does these things by itself, pretty much the same as the Epicurean picture? Yeah, I don't know. I was just thinking about this now, so it's not really a good structured question, but yeah.
Thinking about it. Yeah, and if we follow your interpretation, the world should completely disintegrate at some point, everything should go into dissolution. Well, it's true that for Gassendi, atoms move in all directions. there is no privileged direction. So, but maybe it's the idea of, yeah, atoms trying to freeze themselves. And he also uses the notion of conatus when he tries to express that. It's just that diverse directions oppose themselves and contrary one another, and maybe it's just a way to express it. I would resist reading it as the opposite of Newton's gravitation. Yeah, I have to think about it. The problem being that this innate force of motion in bodies, what he calls mobilitas, it's, well, first it was created by God. The problem is that once it's created by God, it's not really like in Descartes. Atoms do possess themselves this force of motion, but maybe I would resist conceiving of God as creating this force of dissolution of the material world. I mean, if you see it as the reverse of Newtonian gravitation, but yeah, I have to think about it. I'm not sure that my reply is very satisfactory.
Yes, Stefan, please.
Yes, I have the starting point of an answer to your question, Delphine. And I should emphasize, since my PhD students and some of my postdocs are listening, that you cannot use that as an end point of your research. But I found 80 different works on early English books with hits on Gassendi, with, I think, names that you will expect, but also some lesser well-known figures. So that might be, as I emphasized, a starting point for further exploration on the impact of Gassendi on the British Isles.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, at some point I should start this more systematic search. The problem being that I'm a bit torn apart between doing that and diving into Gassendi, which requires also a lot of time. But that could be maybe a project also for someone else, and a new Gassendist, because as I said before the talk, they are sprouting everywhere, which makes me very happy.
But I think that's the nice thing about our the nature of our job. There is always more to explore. So yeah.
For sure. Yes.
Mathieu, please.
Yeah, I wonder here, as you know, I'm not an expert on the English context, but it seems to me when you read the Boyle's papers about the mechanical philosophy, is trying to put together the Cartesians and Gassendi's front. That's pretty clear, I think. But it's also quite clear that he wants to put Hobbes out of the game. So I see Boyle's strategy there to have to say, let's put together the Christianize the new philosophers and let's leave aside this other guy, and so forth. And it seems to me that quite often what in the English context is happening is that they're trying to rephrase some notions and so forth, but with a polemical target in mind, often being Hobbes, at least in those decades. And I think this also affects how they read the laws of nature in many contexts. And as you know, the picture is especially complicated as Gassendi and Hobbes were closed and so forth. So I think here, in order to tell the story, we would need, all of us, we would need to be working more on Hobbes. Although it's never mentioned. So that's a little bit my concern there, which makes it even trickier if you want, but still is the ghost traveling around the island at that point.
Yeah. Hobbes has been haunting me for quite some time because of Gassendi, as you know, and because of optics. And yes, yes, I know. Thank you for the suggestion, Mattia. Yeah.
Is there any other comment or question, especially from those who haven't talked yet? Otherwise, please join me in thanking again Delphine for this very interesting and rich session. We hope to read your paper, I mean, in its final version soon.
Well, soon, no, it's not going to happen. But one day, I'll let you know when it's finished. When one
please share it
version
with
is
us.
finished. Yes, well, thank you very much to all of you for questions, suggestions. That was very, very helpful to me for this paper and maybe for other later papers too. Thank you.
Thank you very much again, and bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
See you guys.
Thank you.